Hello everybody. The rows keep on coming. This time it's in the European Union. The project is hitting the skids because of the pressure that's hitting Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. Of course, she's made a huge power grab over the last number of years in particular. We have also seen the push as well towards Michael McGrath as will be the newly appointed Irish European Commissioner in the next 24 hours or so. He's been pushing for a plum job, an economic portfolio, but it doesn't look like it at the moment. But who knows how this might develop over the next 24 hours. Because today we had the bombshell news that Thierry Breton, the Commissioner for the Internal Markets, resigned because of questions over the objectionable and questionable governance of Ursula von der Leyen. Isn't that interesting? Macron had reappointed Breton to run again as the European Commissioner for another 5-year term, and he was expected to get a plum job. But again, we've seen Breton pull the plug on this nonsense that's going on in the European Union, because we've seen huge pushback against what's been going on, and not be really by Breton, because Breton is a fully signed up member of the European project and a fully signed up member of the globalists also as well. But we've seen the pressures coming on von der Leyen in particular and the European project. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen Germany and Olaf Scholz coming under huge pressure domestically and imposing border controls because of the immigration chaos and pulling out of Schengen. So where now lies the European Migration Pact? But of course, the Irish media won't talk about the European Migration Pact. They'll just keep ploughing on regardless, following the European narrative every single time. This is the same European project that has employed Kaja Kallas as the new Foreign Affairs Chief, the warmongering chief, ex-Estonian Prime Minister. And it's also fascinating to see what's been going on over the last number of weeks as well, in terms of the push for more war by von der Leyen in particular, who has been a fully signed up member of NATO and the US as well, pushing their agenda and narrative every single time rather than the interests of ordinary people. But as I've said, this has been a huge power grab by the European Union and the project over the last number of years. In particular, we've seen most legislation come from lobbyists. 70% of the legislation imposed in Ireland comes from European directives, which again comes from key lobbyists, big corporations, and then is transposed into Irish legislation down the road. So it's been totally anti-democratic, and because people don't really have a say in the policy of the state, which is critically important when you're trying to build democracy. And the whole idea of nationality, the whole idea of sovereignty, has gone out the window, in particular with the European Union project, because we've seen that through the issues going on back to the euro crisis many years ago, when, of course, Jean-Claude Juncker said a bomb would go off in Dublin if we weren't to impose the austerity budgets in Ireland, not to mention the huge bank bailout that saddled us with over 40 to 50% of the total European banking debt. That's a huge devastation, and that shock doctrine created an opportunity to create more powers, which were totally anti any previous treaties that were issued by the European Union. But of course, it opened the door to treaties like the Fiscal Compact to come into play, which the Irish government are now talking about now, to say that we can't spend the Apple money because of the Fiscal Compact rules. Well, this was again a huge power grab during that period of time that we've seen a pushback on democracy and more federal system in the European project. We also seen it since the lockdowns, the huge vaccine deals that von der Leyen negotiated herself with Alfred Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer. That was being investigated by the European Public Prosecution's Office. But of course, what's come of that? 3 years later, nothing to see here. Don't mention the big contracts and the huge power play and huge erosion of our democratic rights in terms of the huge centralisation of power. It's also happened as well with the war in Ukraine in terms of imposing the sanctions. without any national involvement in these sanctions. And anybody that goes against it is threatened or fined. This is the way it works. Not to mention, there's no mention of the Nord Stream, and there's no mention of the sky-high energy bills which are imploding and deindustrialising so many countries around Europe. But of course, von der Leyen, it's about a power grab, and that's really fundamentally what the European Union and the project is about. Not to mention the illiberal project that has actually destroyed so many people's lives for many, many years. They talk about peace and prosperity, but it's about a push towards more war, and we can see the huge push towards militarism, in particular the war in Ukraine. Rather than pursuing peace, they're pursuing the aims of the United States and NATO, and in particular by this huge, huge push towards more war. But it's also fascinating because this is what they're trying to do. This is the whole push of using any sort of crises. It's like a perma crisis that will create the opportunity to create better conditions to push down on people's rights and create more power for the top of society, and ultimately more profits for the big corporations, the billionaires, and the self-serving political classes. So in Ireland, when you see the posturing about the Apple money, for instance, it's interesting to see that posturing because in essence they're all working in the parameters of the fiscal compact. They're not willing to challenge this narrative, not willing to challenge the huge power grab by the European Union. They're not willing to challenge the centralisation of power, and they're more interested in sidling up and not rocking the boat rather than telling the truth to what's going on in terms of how power has been grabbed by people like von der Leyen at the top of the European Union. We've seen it also with other institutions such as the European Court of Justice. We've also seen it with the European Central Bank. And not to mention, we have no control over monetary and fiscal policy. But then when they talk about the European Commissioner and putting a voice in for Ireland at the table over the next number of days, and they'll all be talking about this. But in essence, what's it going to achieve? It's going to achieve the same policies, the same drive towards more war, and the Irish politicians in particular have been some of the most cowardly in Europe. Always the best boys and girls in the class for the European project, rather than pushing a European project that's based really fundamentally on the needs of people, based on peace, based on democracy that comes back to communities, comes back to our nationality, comes back to our nations, comes back and is controlled by the people, which is in Bunrock na HÉireann. But of course, Micheál Martin would say sovereignty is a backward looking idea. So when they're knocking at doors, looking for votes over the next period of time, which they will be, get them to tell the truth about what power really lies and where power really lies in Irish society, rather than the battling over the crumbs and the €10 here or €20 there. Tell them exactly where power lies and why we need politicians to bring power back to our beautiful country that we're all proud of, and our communities where people have a say in what goes on. We've seen that happen with the immigration chaos in particular in Ireland, in terms of the way people have been ignored and silenced because of the questions around the whole push by the political establishment to facilitate the big bosses with their cheap labour, facilitate the big commercial property owners, which is the same, they do the same with the housing market, the vulture funds, with the health chaos, with the private health profiteers making money out of it. Same with education. Every single opportunity to make profit out of somebody's needs is about neoliberalism, deregulation of the market and financialisation of basic needs such as a home, a roof over your head. We see thousands in homelessness. So this is what happens, and this is really where power lies, at the power of those big lobbyists calling the shots, pushing the legislation through that would end up filtering down to Ireland, which is the same as the climate and the green agenda as well, the corporate climate agenda, which benefits the super rich as well. And the attack on freedom of speech with their big tech companies also as well. So these issues are happening, critically important, unless they're discussed, and we need open and frank discussion around all these big issues. So use your voice, whatever voice you have, to talk about these issues And thanks for all the support with all my videos. Take care. Slán. Bye bye.